This episode is brought to you by the Kirtland Partnership Committee. For 30 years, they've been dedicated to supporting, growing, and preserving the Kirtland National Security Complex. They work tirelessly to enhance military readiness, foster community partnerships, improve quality of life, and promote economic development right here in New Mexico. Join their mission to ensure that Kirtland remains a cornerstone of national security and a key provider of quality jobs and investment for all of Greater Albuquerque. Together, we can make a powerful impact. Kirtland Partnership Committee, proudly shaping the future of our national security for 30 years. Dr. Harold Bailey, the former Albuquerque NAACP president and civil rights advocate and titan here in Albuquerque, has died at the age of 78. Albuquerque Journal reporter Matthew Risen sits down with me to discuss Bailey's legacy and how he was remembered by a close friend. And with the 2025 legislative session just under a week away, the Legislative Finance Committee has unveiled their budget proposal, and lawmakers are filing bills. I'm joined by Albuquerque Journal Capitol Bureau Chief Dan Boyd to discuss what the committee is looking for in their budget and a particular bill filing that involves student cell phone use in schools. It's Thursday, January 16th, 2025. I'm Gino Gutierrez, and I'll have more on these stories, plus a look at the Journal's other headlines and Albuquerque's weather forecast, coming up on the Leading News. Dr. Harold Bailey, former Albuquerque NAACP president and a civil rights advocate who dedicated more than 50 years to fighting systemic racism and promoting social justice, has passed away at the age of 78. Remembered for his humility, perseverance, and significant contributions to civil rights efforts at the University of New Mexico and beyond, Bailey's life was recently remembered by Albuquerque Journal reporters Nikayla McClellan and Matthew Risen. Matt joins me now to discuss his story on Dr. Bailey. Matt, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Gino.
So Matt, as we laid out at the start, Dr. Harold Bailey was a massive figure in Albuquerque for civil rights and advocating for those disadvantaged populations. What can you tell us about his background?
Well, Harold Bailey was a monumental figure when it comes to civil rights in Albuquerque and in New Mexico. Basically, he spent much of his time at the University of New Mexico in the Department of African Studies. He was very focused on helping students, particularly students of color, obviously fight for more rights on the campus. For one example, he helped lead a boycott when the baseball team cut the only black player they had in the past 9 years. So basically, he helped lead a charge where other black athletes boycotted playing on other teams to try to get the university to meet their demands of more racial equality across the athletics department.
And Matt, you just touched on how instrumental Dr. Bailey was in addressing racial discrimination at UNM, such as advocating for black student athletes and challenging institutional biases. But his leadership also included initiatives like boycotts and programs to prepare black youth for higher education. So he was really instrumental in a lot of different areas, helping a lot of different groups.
Yes, that's true. He had a great many accomplishments. I mean, he would go to the legislature. He had a big part in the End of Life Act that passed, I believe, in 2020 or 2021. And he was also a big proponent of the Benny Hargrove Act, which was put into place basically after Benny Hargrove, a Washington middle schooler, was shot and killed on the school grounds by a classmate. And basically, the Benny Hargrove Act seeks to penalize parents who allow their children to get their hands on a gun.
And Matt, we've covered his impact for UNM and for black youth, but Dr. Bailey was really a cornerstone figure for everybody in the Albuquerque community.
He was looked to as someone you could count on as a person of color to be in your corner, but also he was looked to as someone who an outsider would look to be like, hey, we want to start having these conversations. We want to start diversifying. How do we do that? And people like APD would bring him to the table.
And Matt, you had a chance to speak with Charles Bucknell, who's a close friend and collaborator of Dr. Bailey's, and he really spoke to you about Bailey's unwavering dedication to justice and community improvement. But what else did he tell you about his friend's legacy?
I mean, this is a man who this is his best friend.
We just lost a great humanitarian, a man who stood up for justice, a man of compassion, and a man who believed strongly that everybody deserved an equal opportunity in our society. And it didn't matter to him what color they were. He would stand up for the little guy. and he was a true servant of the people. So I think that's pretty much what I'd like to say about Dr. Bailey.
I mean, they were obviously partners in this. They'd known each other 50 years, but these are two people who, when they first started in the 70s, they would be driving around trying to fight systemic racism and, promote civil rights around the state, and the FBI and Albuquerque Police Department would be following them. It's like the stuff you hear about, and it was happening right here. I mean, they were at the forefront of civil rights in those days. There was nobody else doing it like they were doing it.
So Dr. Harold Bailey, a massive figure in civil rights here in Albuquerque, gone at the age of 78. But Matt, as you've told us, his legacy will continue to live on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
With the 2025 legislative session fast approaching, the Legislative Finance Committee has released its budget for the upcoming session, and lawmakers are filing bills. With the latest on what we can expect, I'm now joined by Albuquerque Journal-Capitol Bureau Chief Dan Boyd. Dan, thank you so much for joining me.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So Dan, the Legislative Finance Committee has unveiled their budget proposal for the upcoming session, and it comes in at a total of $10.8 billion. What are they looking to address in this budget?
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I've spent a lot of the day trying to digest all the different spending proposals in the budget. There are some interesting things, including raising starting teacher pay in New Mexico to $55,000. It's currently at $50,000. They're also setting aside a lot of money for mental health and drug abuse treatment programs. The way it works in the state is the governor releases her budget recommendation, and then the Legislative Finance Committee releases its plan, and then the two of those proposals are kind of the blueprints that legislators use during the session to pass a final budget. So we're starting to look at how those two plans are similar, and then also some of the differences that they might feature.
And the interesting part, Dan, you just touched on it, is that there's two competing budgets here, one from the governor, one from the Legislative Finance Committee. How do those two stack up?
Yeah, so I think so far they're pretty closely aligned, and both legislators and the executive branch said that today. The strategic water supply is something the governor is proposing. The legislators did not include that in their budget plan today, but Senator George Munoz, who's the LFC's chairman, he said, 60 days, a lot can happen, bring us a proposal, maybe there might be funding for it. So this is kind of a starting point. Certainly that there can be some dialogue and sometimes meeting in the middle on some of these. Another issue, the pay raises for state workers and teachers are a little bit bigger in the legislature's plan than the governor's. That's another area where, I think they could try to hammer out some of those differences.
And Dan, it's no secret that New Mexico's budget has ballooned over the past few years, a lot of that fueled by record high oil and gas revenues. With the new spending complemented by investments in trust funds for future projects, lawmakers are emphasizing prudent spending to ensure financial stability while still addressing crucial state needs.
Yeah, that's kind of the big picture view of this. We've had such remarkable and kind of unprecedented revenue growth that legislators have increased state spending, but at the same time, they've set aside a lot of money into these new trust funds, for early childhood education, for conservation efforts, and with the thinking that, this money will be available into the future as well. So kind of trying to convert this now money into future money, as they like to say it. So I think there's a little bit of a concern that some legislators have about growing state spending too much, and these trust funds have been a way to kind of set aside a little bit of this money so it can still be there for the future.
And let's shift gears, Dan, to bill filings. Legislators are getting their bills in line before the session does start up on the 21st, and Senator Crystal Brentley has introduced a very unique one. I'll go ahead and let you take the lead on this, but it has to do with student cell phone use in schools.
Yeah, so Senator Crystal Brentley, a Republican from Elephant Butte, and she's filed a bill that would incentivize school districts to prohibit cell phones in classrooms. Right now, a lot of school districts, including Albuquerque Public Schools, they do have policies, but I'm told that enforcement of them kind of varies from the school and maybe even classroom to classroom. And this bill she filed would appropriate $10 million that would kind of reimburse any school districts that do enact these kind of policies and help them with paying for the costs of these phone bins or other kind of devices that students could put their phones in during, while they're in class.
And I'm sure for a lot of the parents that are listening to this podcast, Dan, they're thinking, why haven't they thought about this before? But you touched on a really interesting part about this. This is not something that districts would be beholden to do. This is really an incentive for them to think about it, and the state government is saying, we'll reimburse you if you do it.
Yeah, and she made it clear that this isn't a mandate. It wouldn't force school districts to do this, but they would be able to get reimbursed for the money if they were to pursue it. I think, as far as how parents would respond, she pointed out she's the mother of 2 teenage daughters, and that was part of her motivation for bringing this bill. But, I know some parents are also concerned about the idea of cell phone bans just because of, if there is an emergency situation or something like that, they want to be able to get in touch with their kids. So I think it is a complex issue, but we've seen other states and, some other cities around the nation kind of implementing similar proposals. And this could be the first time, New Mexico really looking at a statewide, law on something like this.
So I'm sure that led to some lively discussions around the Brentley dinner table when she was discussing the idea for this bill. But it should come really as no surprise to anybody, Dan, that this bill has garnered a lot of support from educators, including the American Federation of Teachers.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I spoke to Whitney Holland, who's the president of the AFT union here in New Mexico, and she said the approach is something they likely can support. She said they did a survey of K through 12 educators and that student cell phone use was one of their top concerns up there with vaping and a few other issues. And, I think she acknowledged that there's some difficulties, but said she likes this incentive-based approach more than kind of mandating, schools to follow a certain law.
And Dan, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this before you go, but we've had both Republicans and Democrats introduce their priorities for this session, and it's pretty standard stuff. They're looking at crime, healthcare, the economy, things of that nature. But is there a dark horse issue that you think will pop up somewhere in the session that hasn't been discussed openly?
Well, I think we'll know that for sure by March. I mean, I think a lot of the focus is going to be on crime, on behavioral health, on education, on environment bills. I mean, those are the ones getting a lot of traction right now. But there's always something that kind of comes out of the blue. I'm thinking a year or two ago when they adopted the aroma of green chili roasting as the new state aroma. Something like that. You never know at the legislature what might come up.
So the legislative session is sure to keep us on our toes. Albuquerque Journal Capitol Bureau Chief Dan Boyd with the latest. Thanks, Dan.
I appreciate it.
If you like hearing all of the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal here on the Leading News, consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal. You can check our show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription and keep up with all the latest news from New Mexico's leading news source. In other headlines from the newsroom, a homeless man was fatally struck by a vehicle after being kicked out of a North Valley Thai restaurant on Tuesday evening. Albuquerque police say the man, upset after being removed, laid down in the roadway where he was hit by an approaching car. The driver spoke with officers, but left before detectives could question him. The investigation is still ongoing. And Cumulus Media Albuquerque hosted a donation drive Wednesday to support Los Angeles wildfire victims, collecting essentials like clothing, toiletries, and water. Community members gathered at Graphic Connection in Northeast Albuquerque to donate, with Cumulus on-air personalities helping load the items into a U-Haul. Cumulus market manager Jeff Berry said, quote, "Now it's our turn to get back to Los Angeles as it faces unimaginable heartbreak," emphasizing the importance of helping in times of need. And in sports news, the New Mexico Ice Wolves NA3HL team takes on the league-leading Louisiana Drillers this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at the Outpost Ice Arenas in Albuquerque. These teams previously faced off in September, with the Drillers winning 2 of 3 games. Games on Friday and Saturday will take place at 6:30, and the game on Sunday at 2 p.m. Looking for something to do today? Animal Tales with the ABQ Biopark is taking place from 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., and A Matter of Balance with Oasis is happening at the Los Griegos Public Library from noon to 1 p.m. Now looking at Albuquerque's weather forecast, today you can expect sunny skies with a high near 52, and this evening, a low around 24. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. For the leading news, I'm Gino Gutierrez.